In this lesson, we'll learn how to use the Healing Brush tool in Photoshop. So in the previous lesson, we were using the Spot Healing Brush to basically remove some different blemishes, basically some pimples from this gentleman's face. As we can see, they're just toggling the visibility of the layer that we were making those edits on. So it's called the Spot Healing Brush for a reason, in that you're just focusing on little spots, little areas where you're painting those selections and healing them. Again, it's sampling from the surrounding pixels around your selection and using that information to heal the area that you're painting on. Now, if you take an area like this where we have a couple of these little wrinkles right here, if you're wanting to use a Spot Healing Brush for that, you obviously have a larger area that you have to cover. And so the end result might not be as appealing as you would like it to be. Again, it's sampling from surrounding pixels, trying to maintain that tonal and color information. But again, it really wasn't designed to cover large areas. This is where we can use the Healing Brush. Just taking a step back there, hitting Control-Z. So go ahead and click on top of the Spot Healing Brush. You'll get that flyout menu and choose the Healing Brush, second from the top right there. And let's go ahead and just make a new layer, and we'll dedicate the edits that we make with the Healing Brush to be on that layer. Okay, so just to demonstrate here, the Spot Healing Brush allows you to choose where you want to directly sample from. Now, actually, before I do this, have a quick look up here in your options panel. See where it says sample? By default, it's set to current layer. So that means you would be sampling from whatever pixels are on the layer that you're currently on. Or you can change it to current and below, which means you could sample from the layer that you're on and all visible layers beneath it in your layers panel in the stacking that you have there, or all layers. So you could sample from all visible layers over here in your layers panel. And I like to usually just have it set to that. So what you can do here is you can hold down Alt. See how it changes your cursor? So now you can choose where you want to sample from. Okay, so maybe I want to sample from right here. And then when I paint, you can see that little crosshair showing where I'm sourcing from. Okay, so already I have a little bit finer control over painting over that particular wrinkle. Now, if we come back up to the options panel, see where it says source. By default, it's set to sampled. So again, basically it's being dictated as to where you're sampling from. You could switch it to pattern, which means you could use a pattern right here. Perhaps you have one saved. You might have a specific texture you saved as a pattern if you're wanting to kind of work that into whatever image you're working on. For something like this, I would leave it to sampled. Now, you can also, just like with the Spot Healing Brush, you can right-click, bringing up that dialog. You can adjust the size of your brush, the hardness. Again, for something like this, I like the hardness to be very low, so it's just a softer brush to get some nicer blending. Okay. So again, just holding down Alt. And so I'll find myself holding down Alt time and again, sampling to heal specific areas. Okay. Now that might look a little bit too clean, too pristine. So this could be a situation where I want to bring back some of those wrinkles just faintly. So what I could do is we'll go ahead and add a layer mask. So there's the mask right there. I'm going to grab my brush tool using black as my foreground color. So black will be anything that you're masking out. So I want to mask out just part of that healed in information that I've applied on this layer. So I'm just using a soft round brush. I've already gone into my brush panel for this brush. I've turned on transfer and I got pen pressure for both controls for opacity and flow, so I can dictate that just based off of how much pressure I apply with my Wacom stylus. And I can just paint very lightly on the mask itself, painting black, just to kind of bring back in those wrinkles just faintly. Toggling the visibility of the whole layer, you can kind of see the difference there. So just kind of bringing those back in just a little bit. And I often recommend that when you're retouching something. It's very easy to go too far, making someone look very unnatural, very plastic looking. Okay, I'll go ahead and make sure I have the thumbnail for that layer selected. Once again, we'll go back to our healing brush. And again, we just have that direct control where we're sampling from, just holding down Alt. We can go ahead and kind of start to clean up some of these remaining blemishes here on his nose. Even this little blown out spot right here, I may not want that to be as strong, okay? So I could go back to my layer mask there. And I've healed it, but I want to kind of bring just a little bit of it back, okay? So kind of see what I've done there, just making that comparison. All right, now another thing I'd like to show you is you have this option up here called Aligned, okay? Again, I'll make sure I have the layer thumbnail selected. So Aligned works really great if you have long, specific areas that you're kind of wanting to heal over. So I'll kind of demonstrate this for you. I'm going to hold down Alt, I'm going to sample, say, right here, and then I'll start to paint. Again, we see the cursor where it starts out at, where it's being sourced, and it kind of falls along. But if I release and I start to paint again, that cursor, where it's sourcing from, starts out where I originally sampled. To further illustrate this, I'll jump all the way over here to the other side of the image. I'll just do a little painting. And you can see where that little crosshair is, where I originally sampled. It's starting back there again. So you may not want that, okay? So this is where you could check mark Aligned, okay? And so now I could sample, say, right here, paint, release, and as I paint again, it's always remaining aligned to my brush, okay? So let's go ahead and demonstrate this on a separate image just to really drive the point home. And it's also another good opportunity to mention that these healing tools that we're learning about aren't just for retouching people's faces. So this aligned option could come in really handy with, say, like these power lines if you wanted to remove those. So again, I want to work non-destructively. I'm making a new layer. We'll zoom in, hitting Control equals on our keyboard. So you can see we've got some tonal changes here. It's lighter down here, a little bit darker right up here as far as the sky goes. That could potentially cause you some issues if you're, painting along and it keeps sourcing from over here and you don't have the aligned option. But if we go ahead, I'll just sample and I'll paint, I'll release, continue painting, and you can see where the source is. It's always aligned with my cursor. And of course, I can always change that alignment up. I may want to sample from above the power line. And every time I continue painting, it's always aligned with my brush. Very, very handy. All right. So my challenge to you is, go ahead and try that out in between lessons. Go ahead and try and remove those little power lines right there. We'll revisit this image later on using another form of healing, okay? And then finally, just like we had with the spot healing brush, you also have access to some blend modes. It really kind of depends on the situation you're in, but kind of like what we demonstrated in the previous lesson, you can go ahead and kind of try out some of those and kind of see how those work in specific areas. In our next lesson, we're going to shift gears and we're going to talk about content-aware fill and how that works and how we can remove some unwanted information from an image. So stick around. We'll see you then.